Story 1. I am a handyman. A common saying among contractors is, "Can't see it from my house." Have you ever seen those videos from home inspectors highlighting all the crooked or broken issues in brand new construction? It's because the builders do not care. Once all the cracks start forming in your walls, they claim, "Oh, that's just the house settling." No, they built it poorly in the first place, and now their subpar workmanship is becoming evident. Story 2. I work in a plastic bag plant. Everything here runs on electricity. The owners tapped into a power line that runs through the property, and for more than 10 years, they didn't pay a dime. They made tens of millions. When the fraud was discovered, they blamed an employee from Latin America and were given a $200,000 fine. You can't find the story online anymore. They used their community connections to have it erased and flat out deny it ever happened. Who says crime doesn't pay? Story 3. I work as a gardener specializing in invasive species remediation. It is unregulated and underpaid for what is incredibly dangerous work. My main focus is giant hogweed, and I have seen people treating it in shorts and a t-shirt. The sap is phototoxic and can cause third-degree burns in sunlight for up to 7 years. I would gladly complete the paperwork and obtain the necessary licensing if it meant untrained and unequipped people were not risking life-changing injuries for just a few £100s. Story 4. As a longtime probation officer, one thing that surprises people is how many unusual, creative sentences we have to enforce. Most people think such sentences are banned by the 8th Amendment, but that is not really how it works. Most of the time, the offender willingly takes the plea deal for the unorthodox sentence to avoid prison. So they never appeal on 8th Amendment grounds, since that would just result in resentencing and going to prison. Occasionally, such sentences make the news, but many do not. The most notable case I worked on was in 2016, which did make the news, when a woman was sentenced for a serious case of animal neglect. The judge gave her a choice: incarceration or spending a day sitting in the stinkiest, smelliest part of the county dump to see how it feels to live in filth. She chose the latter. We had to contact the dump and inform them that it was the judge's orders to help us find the most revolting place there. They did not believe us until we showed them the paperwork. I took it seriously and found the nastiest place there for her. By the end, I think she was wishing she had chosen the jail time. Story 5. A local politician got in trouble for inappropriate behavior. Turns out he was employed by my company, and no one had ever heard of him. He was a consultant who used his position in government to steer contracts to the company. Story 6. No longer employed there, but when I worked at a large home improvement retailer, we would occasionally see hopeful strangers sitting in our lobby with boxes or other packaging waiting for meetings. These individuals were small-time inventors of new products trying to get them on the shelves of our retail locations. What they didn't know was that, as a condition for consideration of carrying the product, they would be required to turn over one or more samples to the company for examination by the product teams. If the product showed promise, one of those samples would be shipped to another country, where it would be thoroughly dissected and analyzed so that an equivalent product could be developed under the house label, with enough modifications to avoid infringing on any patents. That product was what would end up on the shelf. From what I heard, a lawsuit effectively ended the practice, and now they don't allow pitches from independent producers anymore. They just wait to see what other retailers are already carrying and selling well, and copy those. Story 7. I used to work at an office that prided itself on winning awards for being environmentally friendly. The awards hung behind the front desk, and management frequently reminded employees about the difficulty of achieving this recognition. One year, I was designated as the environmental representative and was responsible for filling out the application for the award. I found that obtaining a passing grade was surprisingly easy. For instance, a large portion of the questions asked how much we recycle. Our office had recycling bins, but our landlords disposed of that material in the trash when they picked it up. I didn't mention that on the form, at least 10 to 20% of the questions did not pertain to what our company did, so we marked those as not applicable. It was easy to overstate contributions. If a prompt asked if you ever returned a lot of unused products, you could describe it that way, even if it was just returning one item to a store. Responsibility could be shifted. For example, if a question related to waste disposal arose, we could say it was the contractor we were paying, so we didn't mention it. The easiest strategy of all was when a question asked to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. It was best to always give a 10 as long as you didn't have to support the claim. Story 8. I work in dementia care. Your grandparents get really creative with old swear words when they are less inhibited, and they have the greatest sense of humor. Story 9. I work in a grocery store. We do not clean the lids of yogurt or sour cream tubs if the lid falls off. We simply put it back on the product. Can fall on the floor or in a puddle of milk. It does not matter. At most, we might wipe it off on our apron or with a paper towel if available. Bulk produce items do fall on the floor regularly. We just pick them up and place them back on the shelf if they are not damaged. If a container of berries or tomatoes pops open, we put them all back in and return it to the shelf. Nothing is rinsed off first. Almost nothing is actually made in the bakery. Everything either arrives already made or in portion pieces of dough that are placed into the oven. The only work done is decorating cakes, donuts, bread, and bagels. Even most cakes arrive with icing already applied. They just add some extra decorations. All seafood is delivered frozen and is kept frozen, although the sign claims it is never frozen. Seafood employees will take bags of frozen shrimp off the shelf and place them in the display case. You are essentially paying more for thawed shrimp. Story 10. I sang opera professionally for a long time. The amount of sexual harassment and assault that is not only overlooked but excused is absolutely abhorrent. When Domingo was called out, I had a colleague who defended him furiously. Her argument was that he was always nice to her. Well, he must be a good person then if he was nice to one lady who was close to his age and already an established artist. He preyed on young women early in their careers. Our former general director didn't care about most of the artists and would repeatedly hire one particular conductor who groped a colleague on stage. It's getting a little better, but it's still far too slow. Story 11. I work in laboratory testing high fructose corn syrup. You may be surprised by the amount of bacteria, yeast, mold, and metal pieces that Coca-Cola and Pepsi allow. Story 12. My company will hire you based on physical attraction. My boss believes that having young, attractive women in the office will encourage more employees to come in because they will want to engage with them. Story 13. I worked in a grocery store. Expired products and those about to expire were used in the preparation of various salads, baked goods, and other items. Story 14. UK universities receive most of their funding from the tuition fees of international students. They may accept weaker applicants and overlook poor performance if it means the overseas tuition revenue continues to flow in. Story 15. We are transporting highly corrosive chemicals across the country in tanks that have consistently failed safety inspections. Very few are stopped, making it more cost-effective for the company to pay fines rather than repair the tanks or purchase new ones. With cuts to funding, layoffs, and the relaxation of environmental regulations, it is becoming increasingly easier to do this. Story 16. I once worked for a polling company that conducted surveys for elections and marketing purposes. I learned that numbers can be manipulated to support almost any argument and that election polls should not be trusted when the results are too close. Story 17. Don't ever buy anything marinated from a butcher or meat case. This is how older meats are sold. The marinade covers the smell. Story 18. I work in public service. I don't know if I would call it a secret, but when the government started stocking men's restrooms with free pads and tampons, we all agreed to turn a blind eye to the one transgender man taking them regularly and donating them to the local homeless shelter. He is the only one affected, and he is keeping homeless women well supplied at the government's expense. Story 19. Not my current workplace, but I worked for a nonprofit that focused on a specific medical condition. They did good work and the local chapters were great, but the staff at the national level was unhinged. One year at the national conference, top-level staff had bloody letters shoved under their hotel doors. They had forced out the national director because it came out that she had left the country permanently with her assistant and had not actually done any work in more than 2 years. The letters threatened to damage the organization's reputation and ruin the work they were doing if any of it came out. They had just received a massive donation and could not risk it, so the whole thing was hushed up. Story 20. I worked for a medical research company. All those research methods that are not permitted here are conducted in other countries. I was responsible for managing the machine that contained all the research and information on the experiments being conducted in South America. Story 21. I am a software engineer with experience in several technology companies across major tech hubs in the United States. Artificial intelligence is not as magical as it may seem. Sometimes, it is simply a complex decision tree. Story 22. I mean, it's not dirty, nor is it really a secret, but the hamburgers that don't sell at Wendy's are taken off the grill and placed into a container in the refrigerator below the grill. Those become tomorrow's chili. The chicken in the chicken sandwiches that does not sell is used in tomorrow's crispy chicken salads. Back when Wendy's had salad bars, the buns that didn't sell became tomorrow's garlic bread. Story 23. I am a scientist working at a well-known institution that houses many popular scientists, particularly among the public and on platforms like Reddit. Many of these individuals are the most inappropriate and intolerable lechers. I have had to intervene numerous times on behalf of female graduate students and postdoctoral researchers who are facing harassment. Generally, no consequences follow for these men. After decades of an institutional culture like this, a few scientists were finally dismissed after committing criminal offenses supported by physical evidence and witnesses. Even then, it occurred only after months of paid leave for them. I recently saw one of these individuals return, indicating that even that action had little impact. Your hero might be one of these individuals. Story 24. I work in tax collection for the Department of Motor Vehicles. The majority of employees here are often incompetent and consistently collect taxes and fees improperly, sometimes charging too much or too little based on the situation. The supervisors are usually too busy to correct mistakes and double-check the fees. Since taxpayers often do not know all of the laws regarding vehicle tax collection, mistakes continue unnoticed. In the collector's defense, the tax codes are numerous, difficult to understand, and constantly changing as lawmakers rewrite the rules. Story 25. My office relocated, and mail for the old office continued to be delivered. One day, I received a piece of mail addressed to Faces of Death. My new office is where they would produce these disturbing movies, if you remember those commercials. I only showed this to 2 coworkers and nobody else knows. Otherwise, they would be shocked. Story 26. All 4 major accounting firms are involved in highly unethical conduct. What occurs at the senior levels of all 4 is appalling, and the notion that any of them are independent is laughable. They also treat their best and brightest employees poorly by bullying and gaslighting them into excessive work. Spending time on the accounting subreddit reveals the effects of this particular abuse. Story 27. Some schools do not allow students with special needs to take standardized tests because it could lower their overall scores, leading to reduced funding. Story 28. I have coworkers who know my Reddit username and regularly look at my comments or replies. However, they do not realize that I am aware they know. It is obvious, even though they believe they are being subtle while spying on me for some reason. They mix up things I say in real life with comments I've left on Reddit and cannot keep it straight. I have known for quite some time, so every once in a while, I include some surprising statements. I can tell when they have read them because their demeanor towards me changes. I dislike certain types of politics, and they mimic my sentiments when I make any comments about them on Reddit. Anyway, the cat is out of the bag. I am now just wondering if any of you will have the courage to say, "We have been spying on you." Even though you use certain subreddits for self-help, we are all reading your posts. Instead of focusing on me, focus on fixing your broken marriages, rocky and unhappy home lives, and your gambling and substance addiction problems. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Story 29. In the bakery department of the membership-based warehouse store where I work, we used to throw away or donate a significant amount of product weekly. At a minimum, we were scanning out 2 to 3 pallets, at least 6 to 7 feet high, probably worth half to $750,000 on a nightly basis. It took the pandemic, a new store manager, and a couple of new bakery managers to reduce those numbers to scanning out 4 to 5 pallets every week instead of nearly every day. Regarding the craft store I used to work at, I could write a book on that. Story 30. I work in a manufacturing-related industry. We emphasize how much effort we are putting into making our consumer products eco-friendly and sustainable, which does have an impact. However, the amount of waste our daily operations generate is staggering. While working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic, I was receiving samples, contracts, and other documents to review and sign, and I filled up 4 to 5 large trash bags each week with the plastic shippers and styrofoam padding that accompanied them. Imagine that multiplied by 100 people doing similar work across the organization. Now that we are back in the office, we require trash collection multiple times a day. This does not even address the numerous next-day international air shipments we send, the items factories scrap due to minor defects, and the unsold products that go straight to landfills after sitting in a climate-controlled warehouse for a year. The point I am making is that trying to reduce your personal carbon footprint is a noble goal. Do not abandon it. However, real change will need to come from holding corporations accountable for the waste they generate. Story 31. I worked at a clothing donation sorter and exporter for cash under the table. All those donation bins you see in parking lots with different charities written on them are owned by one company that donates a small percentage to charity to use the charity's name. All clothes and shoes are exported to Africa for profit. Everything else is considered trash and goes to the garbage, including toys, books, art, digital media, and electronics. The company was run by 4 fairly recent immigrants, and each of them had a late model car and owned property in a high cost of living area. They did allow employees to pick through and take any and all rejected items, which enabled me to have a thriving side hustle flipping games, movies, and toys during the few years I worked there. Story 32. Companies are willing to retain insurance agents who engage in illegal or unethical behavior as long as they continue to generate new business. It is disturbing to witness blatant ethical and legal violations in this industry, simply for the sake of selling policies, with companies protecting these agents solely because they contribute to the company's profits. Story 33. I have worked in education for over 15 years, primarily in various support positions rather than as a teacher. Schools and school districts often employ creative methods to improve their grades, graduation rates, and test score averages. Many of these methods involve recommending failing students to enroll in alternative education programs, homeschooling, or private schools. This practice is widely known, and every spring, waves of seniors meet with guidance counselors who suggest these options. For this reason, I do not place much value on education rankings. Story 34. ASE certifications lack value. In the recent in-person classes I attended for these certifications, they provided the answers at the end, ensuring that participants could not fail, and then required payment for the certification. Story 35. I can't go into too much detail, but I once worked in a lab at a prestigious university that was committing copyright infringement by paying several people to manually copy data from textbooks for 8 hours a day. They were also not compensating the data entry staff for the full hours they worked and were paying them close to minimum wage. They were underpaying me as well, so I resigned and moved to a job that offered me a 100% raise. Story 36. Dog training and boarding facility. Your dog doesn't understand what you bring in because it's our responsibility if they eat something overnight and cause a blockage. Story 37. My former boss enabled men to flirt and ask for sexual favors from young interns aged 18 to 22. He protected them from any consequences, which was unacceptable. Story 38. My 2 agency bosses passed large profit distributions to their holding company to pay themselves, then present all the agency financials to everyone in quarterly meetings under the guise of complete transparency. They do this to justify the need for us to work harder and to explain why substantial raises are not possible. They earn 1.5 to 3 times the salary of the highest paid employees, my counterpart and me, while contributing very little. It is important to note that we could not give raises. This is a significant distinction. Story 39. I worked at a kindergarten where students were asked to memorize stories in a second language. They would record these stories and create advertisements claiming that the children had mastered the language simply because they were enrolled in the kindergarten, even though the kids had only memorized the material. Story 40. If a customer dropped a fork, we would go into the kitchen and simply wipe it with a tissue. I told the chef that was really bad for the customer, and he responded, "Wipe it or leave." So I quit yesterday. Story 41. Not dirty but still a liability. How much access do developers and engineers have to personally identifiable information of users, even though that data is supposed to be encrypted and protected? Story 42. I used to work at a popular pizza place infested with roaches. I remember seeing a few here and there and trying to forget about it. Then one day, my coworker was cleaning behind the fridge and hitting it with a broom. There might have been 15 to 30 of them visibly scurrying around at the bottom of just one fridge. One time, when I handed someone a pizza box, a roach was crawling on the counter towards the guy, and I knocked it off. I definitely didn't get paid enough to deal with that, and the manager was difficult. We left pizza in the display one day, and he made us clean the walls and floors by hand. He also stopped giving me shifts, and I was working only once every 2 weeks. That put me in a really bad spot moving forward, but thankfully I got a real job that pays more than double what I was making. Story 43. I have shared this before, but when I worked for the local power company in my city in information technology, I discovered that their entire billing system operated on a Windows 98 machine connected to a 28K modem. Story 44. I used to work at theme parks, and no, the employees are not excited to be there. The pay is universally low, and benefits usually amount to a couple of days you can visit as a guest. If you get hurt on the job, you are out of luck. Although I'm sure none of this is really a surprise. Story 45. Well, things are happening right now. I'm an apprentice in my first year, and the woman in charge of all the apprentices has kissed one of the apprentices during a company party. Additionally, she danced provocatively in front of one of the board members and drunkenly licked the apprentice's throat during a drinking game. She also has a boyfriend of 10 years. She willingly resigned a couple of days ago. However, I doubt that was the case. Please excuse my English. It's not my first language. Story 46. No-kill shelters transfer animals to county animal shelters to handle the difficult aspects. Rescues come through the county shelters and take all the cute animals, then charge hundreds of dollars for them. Most animals are euthanized due to kennel cough, with many being brown pits or black dogs that have a runny nose or are simply reported as coughing. Story 47. The defense industry, specifically in the United States, faces challenges in updating and maintaining military equipment. One reason for the high costs is that the government often pays companies the prices they provide without thorough investigation. For example, a valve costing $3 may be sold to the Navy for $30, and a computer costing $900 could be sold to the Army for $2,400. While many items are genuinely expensive, it is likely that the military is overpaying for them. Story 48. I am going to celebrate. I have been with my organization for 5 years. They serve federal and state clients, making things better for people. They do an excellent job and treat us employees very well. I wish they paid more, but they have not engaged in questionable practices to capture business. I say this because I have worked for companies that grew from small to large, and the leadership harmed clients and employees in the process. These leaders became well-known and made themselves wealthy. I am glad I don't work for those kinds of people anymore. My company is exceptional. Story 49. I work in signage, and we have some major brands under our roof. We produce 80% of the signs in our warehouse, which lacks air conditioning. The workers smoke throughout the day, and all the signs come out covered in sweat and saliva. Yet no one seems to care. Story 50. I am leaving the education industry, but I used to work with school district administration, and it genuinely frustrates me. In my state, superintendents and department heads are making six-figure salaries, much of which comes from taxpayer money. Most of their jobs involve simply signing paperwork and attending conferences. Many have not been in classrooms for years, and some have never been, making them completely out of touch with teachers' needs. Meanwhile, teachers are barely making ends meet while classrooms receive less funding, leading to larger and harder to control class sizes. Additionally, I could discuss issues like corruption, embezzlement, payments under the table, nepotism, sex scandals, and payoffs to questionable contractors. This is why I am relieved to be leaving this industry. Story 51. As someone who works in corporate finance, I can say that offshore accounts can engage in questionable activities. However, since they operate outside of U.S. jurisdiction, my company does not report them, as they are compensated regardless. Story 52. Old workplace. If you buy DVDs from places like Amazon and BOL.com, and they were produced before 2020, they are not new. They are purchased by the sellers at thrift stores or other places. The discs cleaned of scratches, new plastic wrapped around the case, and sold as new for the full price. Story 53. Compostable trays, cups, plates, and similar items can often be misleading. Many schools felt pressured to adopt them because they are considered environmentally friendly, but these items frequently end up in landfills alongside regular trash rather than being sent to composting facilities. The same applies to eco-friendly wedding plates and restaurant takeout bags and boxes. While these items may eventually break down to some degree, they require specific conditions to fully decompose into soil, including rotation, oxygenation, moisture, and proper treatment. In landfills, they can take decades or longer to start decomposing, if they decompose at all. It is not as environmentally friendly as many believe. Story 54. Prior employer, a large technology company, discontinued drug testing due to a significant number of employees and managers being under the influence of hard drugs. There were numerous complaints about wild parties involving drugs, along with enough incidents of sexual harassment to be deeply concerning. Story 55. Some immigration attorneys genuinely want to help, but many, particularly those who take on cases of detained individuals, are aware that you are likely to lose your case and face deportation. Nonetheless, they will take thousands of dollars from you and advise you to ignore those who say you are wasting your money. There are very few laws that protect immigrants from attorney scams. Story 56. I am a teacher. Students' rapidly decreasing attention spans and critical thinking abilities are real concerns. Over the past 3 years, I have noticed that children struggle to focus for more than 5 minutes without resorting to drawing or talking to the person next to them. Additionally, with the presence of advanced artificial intelligence, they are not facing the academic challenges they should, as they can obtain entire course notes in seconds and simply cram a few days before tests. This will certainly be an issue in about 20 years when children raised on generative artificial intelligence and limited attention spans become our primary workforce, but I will likely be retired by then. Story 57. I taught at a community college in rural Florida. Funding for the school from the Florida state government is largely tied to enrollment count, graduation rates, and the admission of minority students, as stated by the president. The president also mentioned that to increase the minority student count, the school would expand its athletics program to attract more minority students. The president is being manipulated by one of his executives, a female, and this executive's husband, a faculty member, to secure more funding for the couple. One of the recent vice presidents of academic affairs and her best friend, who was the assistant dean, had been friends long before they assumed their roles. Both were demoted because they allegedly did not want to grant tenure to a faculty member they did not personally like. My college would accept any student. A student used artificial intelligence to write multiple papers. The faculty member gave failing grades to the student for these submissions. After some pressure, the faculty member was instructed to change the failing grades, allow the student several weeks to revise the papers, and provide a new semester grade. Administration does not prioritize academic rigor. They simply want to continue accepting anyone and passing all students. There is a revolving door of nursing professors at the school. Some former professors have been too rigorous in their teaching. One of my colleagues was not renewed because his students' grades were not high enough and not enough students were passing. There is a faculty member who has an accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act to work from home due to agoraphobia. One of my colleagues referred to him dismissively as the man who's scared of bats. This colleague is now the handicapped faculty member's supervisor. Story 58. Not my current employer, but a previous one. During COVID-19, the National Health Service was offering personal protective equipment to many businesses in the care sector. From what I understand, it was provided for free at the time because it was considered a necessity. The small family-run care business I worked for only needed a small number of masks. They did not even use safety goggles. Yet, they received weekly deliveries of large quantities of boxes, replenishing the masks they needed and storing the rest in a van. I asked them why we had more than we needed. The owner replied, "We may not need them, but we might as well take them while they're giving them away." Another notable issue I encountered frequently was the transfer of staff from their other business. They completed the paperwork as if it were a formal recruitment process, but the director of both companies, who is the same person, acted as both the recruiter for the new role and the referee for the previous role. They even went as far as providing full written references addressed to and from the exact same person. Story 59. For the housing industry, everyone is involved with almost everyone. It resembles a large polyamorous workplace. This dynamic is not confined to one office, and many employees maintain monogamous relationships at home with children and other commitments. In my last 2 experiences there, I was made the subject of unwanted attention, with overt hints being dropped. Eventually, after attempts to ignore the advances failed, I had to firmly reject the behavior. This resulted in a hostile environment, with one individual even groping me and reprimanding me when I chose to walk away, insisting, "I am your superior." The customer support industry often attracts individuals who use drugs. This is not universal, but many people enter this line of work to socialize, engage in relationships, and partake in substances. Additionally, if you are one of those individuals who berates the representative trying to assist you, I wish you good luck with your problem. Some representatives do not put in effort, while others deliberately create obstacles out of spite. Please refrain from mistreating customer service agents. They are not responsible for your frustrations and genuinely want to help. As an extra note, I have observed some agents placing callers on hold to chat with friends for a brief period before returning to resolve issues quickly. Disclaimer: this is not always the case. Oftentimes, representatives seek assistance from their supervisors. However, I want to emphasize that if you treat customer support agents kindly and acknowledge their humanity, they will respond in kind. Story 60. I used to work for a chain of bakeries that has approximately 15 stores. Nearly everything you buy has been partially baked at a central location, frozen, then sent overnight to the stores, where it is rebaked and sold to the public. Story 61. Dirty secret, yes. People should know this. I worked as clergy in a specific denomination for a decade. There are some who are genuinely in it because they answered the call to serve, and I am thankful to them. They exemplify what a follower of Christ is supposed to be. Someone who welcomes their neighbor and truly adheres to Christ's teachings. Most, however, are in it for self-gratification and to boost their own ego. They hold training sessions and workshops regularly, claiming to uphold a certain standard, but in reality, they only care about education, status, their image, and money. There is no grace in their work, just narcissism. It's the United Methodist Church, by the way. And no, I'm not someone who wanted to split. I welcome all and believe everyone should have an equal opportunity for life and happiness. Story 62. Late, so this might get buried. I will keep this somewhat vague as the company has a history of retaliation. I worked for a technology company where a significant portion of the workforce attempted to unionize after a new executive team arrived and began stripping away many of the benefits and values of the company. If they had been successful, I believe it would have had a major impact on the industry. This historically remote-friendly company enforced a forced return to office, specifically targeting the 2 departments with the highest number of people trying to form the union first. The return to office had unreasonable terms and a short decision window, or the option of a generous severance package. Somewhere between 30% and 40% of the company accepted a package, essentially undermining the unionization effort. The dirty secret I know that others don't is that 2 of the new executives explicitly negotiated the ability to work from home indefinitely as part of their lucrative compensation packages. To my knowledge, they continue to do so. I also know that the return to office was not considered until after the executives were made aware of the union activity. Cultural cohesion and improved collaboration. Indeed. Story 63. The place I work has an employee stock ownership plan. Apparently, the owner of this company has siphoned $50 to $60 million from company profits and stashed it away in a bank account separate from the corporation. This has led to a gross undervaluation of the company. He is currently being sued for violations of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. I would love to tell my fellow coworkers that the retirement program here is not what they claim it is, but I fear retribution. Story 64. The Rural Electric Cooperative serves as a refuge for unsuccessful Republican politicians. After losing an election, they often receive a position at the electric utility that provides temporary support until they can return to office or become a staff member for another politician. Story 65. Hospitals do not have enough staff or equipment, and it is only through sheer luck and the skills of the staff that you do not end up in a critical situation. Story 66. A higher-up at a hospital was asking different women to come work on a research paper privately at his house. He was very convincing as he was grooming them. However, this paper couldn't be done in public places because others might think it was something romantic. I was one of the women he invited. He would hound me at work about how this opportunity would advance my career and help me get promoted. Thankfully, my husband protected me and said absolutely not. The creep was very persuasive. It is frightening looking back at how close I came to being one of his victims. Not long after, someone reported him to Human Resources. They found that he was inviting many women in the hospital to research and offering promotions as a lure. He was also sending inappropriate pictures and pressuring women. The hospital offered him paid leave with no questions asked. He took the leave and found a chief executive officer position at another hospital and teaches at a college as well. I discovered that he had invited nearly every woman on our floor to research with him. He was highly respected at our hospital, and he was never sued. It never went to the newspaper, and the hospital hushed it up. So he just gets to continue his abusive behavior from a higher position of power. The hospital made it clear that if I spoke out, I would be unemployed. Be careful. Sometimes the creeps are the ones who provide the recognition and attention you've always wanted, but it's all part of the grooming. Story 67. I worked at Bayer, and they promote their mental health awareness badges extensively. However, if you have a mental health issue like I did, they may quickly terminate your employment. Story 68. This is common knowledge, but many people choose to create problems in hospitals, and it is almost always a terrible idea. Story 69. If you call customer service for anything, I have worked many jobs where I answer the phone and try to help people with their concerns. Freaking out, yelling, or berating the person you speak with accomplishes this. It delays the resolution of your concern because the person you spoke with most likely has to carefully document the conversation or decompress. Sometimes they even have to review the entire incident with their supervisor to be familiar with the complaint if it's escalated to them. It also accomplishes this. You have berated someone who is almost certainly not responsible for your problem, cannot change the system or employee that allowed the problem to occur, and does not even make a living wage. Furthermore, it contributes to the burnout of those who answer the phone, leading them to quit. This results in one less person to fix the problems, or a new person who is far less skilled at resolving them. The new person may not know how to fix the issue, or they haven't built rapport with colleagues who can quickly assist because the colleague asking for help has always been there for them. This leads to multiplying problems that are more difficult to resolve. I dislike changing jobs and recently made a lateral transfer to a different medical clinic that is 20 minutes further from home because it has less staff turnover, a much better manager, and a patient population that is unlikely to scream at the front desk or clerical staff. If for no other reason, avoid this behavior because the person who made you angry and created the system is probably salaried, wealthy, and enjoying leisure activities right now. The person on the phone is living paycheck to paycheck, very tired, and works harder than the individual at the top. They could not perform their job as effectively for even a day. Story 70. I work with medical records regularly, but I prefer not to specify my job further. The number of times I observe Casual Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act violations in my workplace is astonishing. Colleagues often make jokes about what they see in those records. Additionally, there is a chance your medical records could be used for internal training within a company, so many people may have seen your records without your knowledge. In my previous job, dealing with insurance disputes, we received medical records from across the state as a third-party mediator, most likely without the patient's knowledge. This may have been legal because they signed a document granting consent for distribution without fully understanding the implications. Story 71. In the old workplace, no one involved still works there, but at one point, 4 out of 7 employees, including the manager and assistant manager, were engaging in inappropriate relationships. It was an awkward time for everyone. Story 72. The world's economy flows through IBM mainframe systems. They are 50-year-old robust machines, running on COBOL, JCL, CICS, and DB2. There is barely any documentation on the code, and very few truly understand the architecture and internal mechanisms. The people who wrote it are either deceased or retired. We can only hope that IBM never experiences a significant incident. A wrong update on Z/OS, the operating system for mainframes, can collapse banks, insurance firms, and retail giants' legacy data. Story 73. Someone died in my Amazon warehouse during peak season. He was covered with delivery boxes until the coroner arrived. They still required everyone to work that day. Story 74. I managed a Town Place Suites. We didn't know what the beeping sound in the laundry room was. A few weeks later, we realized it was because it was out of detergent. I apologized to the guests who slept on rinsed sheets. At least it was hot water. Story 75. A former job in a drug and alcohol probation office. Everyone working there was using drugs or was a drunk driver. One probation officer was trading pills with her neighbor, only to find out he is on probation in our office with another probation officer. Some employees steal pills from probationers when they photocopy the pill bottles for client files. Everyone smoked marijuana, which is only medically legal here. Story 76. I used to work at a gas station, and the amount of waste was appalling. If pizza didn't get picked up, it became trash. Unsold donuts at the end of the day were also discarded, with literal trash bags full of donuts on some days. We weren't allowed to take any of it home, as it was considered theft. However, it was acceptable because there was a 70% markup on anything related to the deli, so in spite of the waste, we still made a significant profit. Story 77. There are many more offenders in public schools than you might think. In my 8-year teaching career, 3 of my colleagues were arrested for child exploitation or molestation. Each time, we were completely blindsided. Could literally be anyone. Please talk to your children regularly and ensure they feel comfortable coming to you when anything feels wrong. I wish every day that I could have done something to intervene. Story 78. I used to work in radio, and part of my job was editing and producing segments for morning shows. The phone calls where the hosts catch a cheater and confront them are all staged. There are services that provide voice actors to play the parts, and editors like me would edit the calls to fit within a specified amount of time to maintain listener engagement. Story 79. A girl at my workplace applies a 30% gratuity to the bill before handing it to the customer and explains that gratuity is included in our facility, which it is not, or she remains silent. Essentially, she takes money from customers. Management decided to let her off with a warning not to do it again. Story 80. I work in providing assistive equipment for older people, such as life alert systems. If you are over 95, it will take longer to receive any equipment because our managers are concerned that we go through the whole process and you may pass away in 2 weeks, which they see as time and money wasted. It is frustrating, but if you find yourself in this situation, keep calling us until something happens. For anyone under 95, it typically takes no more than 1 week. Story 81. As a fraud advisor in a call center, you are familiar with the voice recognition security methods that banks use when you call in. We can track every instance you have used this method and when you enrolled in it. Therefore, be mindful of your surroundings and avoid any inappropriate behavior, such as yelling or using profane language, when using these methods to contact your bank. Story 82. I'm a bit late here, but I'll share this anyway. The cellar of the pub I worked in frequently floods with sewage. It literally fills up with waste, and management tells us that we can't close the pub. We call it the sewage pit. Imagine barrels of beer floating in contaminated water with actual waste drifting past them. And we're still serving customers pints while they complain about the strange smell, which we're not allowed to explain. The area gets hosed down every time it happens and is disinfected. but there are cracks and grates in the floor that are caked in brown residue. If you live in an old town with historic buildings and a poor sewage system, this might happen more often than you'd think in other pubs, especially in corporate chains that do anything to stay open and make money, no matter how bad things get. There is a legal case happening regarding this, but I'm not personally involved. Story 83. Amazon tracks everything you watch, click, play, listen to, and interact with around the clock, every day of the year. They know more about you than you realize. Every word you say around their devices can be scanned, stored, and potentially accessed by agencies. All that data is used to influence your behavior, overwhelming you with highly targeted advertisements until you buy things you don't need. They are not just selling products. They are shaping your decisions. Story 84. I work at a root canal specialist clinic. They use bleach to disinfect the drilled-out canals. We refer to it as regular to avoid alarming people. Story 85. Annie is married but has been involved with almost every man in the office. Everyone is friendly with her husband when he comes to the office or work events. Story 86. I worked there one day as a temporary employee for full disclosure. There are elderly care homes in your city that function like prisons. They are meant for dementia and Alzheimer's patients who cannot be trusted not to wander off. The problem is that some of the people in these facilities are perfectly functional, do not want to be there, and have nothing better to do than try to escape. For them, it feels like a prison, except they are surrounded by individuals with dementia and Alzheimer's. I have a hard time imagining a worse situation. Story 87. If you have our monthly services, it's actually someone from India doing your bookkeeping while you speak to an American customer service representative. The communication between the two is poor, which leads to subpar work. Please hire a local certified public accountant or bookkeeper who is not affiliated with a large consulting firm. They all follow this practice. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.